10 years. A decade that once sparkled with a promise of eternal companionship had subtly dimmed into a routine existence for me. A 38-year-old woman, and my husband aged 42. Our marriage, once a vibrant tapestry of love and mutual respect, had gradually frayed into a mundane partnership devoid of the affection and passion that once defined us. In the early years, our love was the kind spoken of in fairy tales. We would find any excuse to be near each other, our conversation stretching late into the night, filled with dreams and laughter. Physical affection was abundant. A touch, a kiss, a hug. These were the unspoken languages of our love. But as time passed, these moments of closeness became rare, almost like fleeting shadows. I often found myself lying awake in our bed, feeling the cold distance between us. The space felt larger each night, an invisible chasm that grew with every unspoken word and unmet need. I yearned for the simplest forms of affection, a hand held, a quick kiss goodbye, a warm embrace. But these gestures had become as rare as rain in a desert, leaving me parched for emotional connection. Communication, once the cornerstone of our relationship, had withered. I attempted to bridge this gap, initiating conversations about our dwindling intimacy. My words were met with dismissive nods or empty promises of change. I felt unheard, unseen, as if I were a ghost in my own home. This lack of communication extended to our sex life, which had become an infrequent and unfulfilling encounter. On the rare occasions we were intimate, it was perfunctory, devoid of the passion and mutual satisfaction that once ignited our connection. I often lay there afterward, staring at the ceiling, engulfed in a silence that screamed louder than any words. Despite this, our daily life maintained a facade of normalcy. We went about our routines, a well-rehearsed dance of domesticity. To the outside world, we were a perfectly ordinary couple. But inside, our home was a theater where the play of our love no longer held any meaning. The emotional toll was heavy. Resentment began to seep into the cracks of my heart, a slow poison that tainted my view of the man I once loved so deeply. I questioned what had changed. Was it the inevitable evolution of a long-term relationship, or had we simply stopped trying? The answers eluded me, lost in the silence that had become our constant companion. As I navigated through this phase of our marriage, I grappled with feelings of loneliness and frustration. The man who once promised to be my partner in life now seemed more like a distant roommate, sharing space but not life. The void between us grew, filled with unspoken words and unmet needs, a testament to a love that once was but now seemed a distant memory. In this state of emotional limbo, I found myself at a crossroads, yearning for the affection and connection that had once defined our union. Yet I remained hopeful, clinging to the remnants of a love that seemed to be slipping away with each passing day. The office, a place of mundane routines and endless paperwork, unexpectedly became the stage for a seismic shift in my life. It started innocuously with my coworker, a 44-year-old man whose desk was just a casual stroll from mine. He was charming in a nonchalant way, his humor a refreshing break from the monochrome of daily tasks. Our initial interactions were trivial, exchanges about weekend plans or comments on the weather. However, his presence began to linger in my mind, a welcome distraction from the emotional desert I inhabited at home. His words, always laced with a hint of flirtation, started to ignite something within me that I thought had long since extinguished. His compliments were like a balm to my bruised self-esteem. When he remarked how my new haircut suited me or noticed the color of my blouse, I felt seen in a way I hadn't in years. There was a growing warmth in his gaze that made my heart race, a sensation I hadn't felt in what seemed like an eternity. The flirtation escalated subtly. Shared lunches turned into coffee breaks just for two. Our conversations ventured beyond the safe territories of work and weather, delving into personal territories. I learned about his hobbies, his aspirations, the contours of his life outside the office walls. And in turn, I found myself sharing pieces of my own life, the joys and the sorrows. Then came the day when our harmless banter crossed the line. It was an accidental brush of hands as we both reached for a document, but the electricity of that touch sent shockwaves through me. It was as if a dormant volcano had suddenly come to life, sending a rush of adrenaline and desire coursing through my veins. The first kiss happened in a moment that was both unexpected and yet somehow inevitable. We were working late, the office quiet and deserted. The air between us crackled with unspoken tension. When his lips met mine, it was a confluence of desperation and desire. It was a kiss that spoke of unfulfilled needs and a hunger for connection. That night, we crossed the final boundary. It was in a secluded part of the city, away from the prying eyes of those who knew us. The lovemaking was intense and passionate, a stark contrast to the mechanical interactions with my husband. In his arms I felt desired alive, a stark reminder of what I had been missing. Yet, as I lay there in the aftermath, a tangle of satisfaction and guilt, I knew I would soon be returning home to my husband. The thought brought a crushing weight of reality down upon me. I had stepped into a realm of betrayal, driven by a longing for something that had been absent in my life for far too long. Driving home, the night's events replayed in my mind. Each touch, each whisper, each moment of surrender was etched into my memory, a vivid contrast to the coldness that awaited me. I knew that what I had done was a betrayal, yet it was also a desperate cry for something more. Something that made me feel whole, even if just for a fleeting moment. As I entered the silent house, seeing my husband's familiar form, a pang of guilt pierced through me. The contrast between the passion of the night and the emptiness of my marriage was stark and jarring. I was now living a double life, caught between duty and desire, fulfillment and fidelity. In the weeks that followed that fateful night, my life became a complex tapestry of concealed emotions and clandestine meetings. The affair with my coworker, once a momentary lapse, had evolved into a series of stolen moments, each one adding weight to the secret I carried. The dual life I led was exhilarating yet exhausting. At work, I would steal glances at my coworker, our eyes communicating a shared secret that added an undercurrent of excitement to mundane office hours. Our brief touches, a hand on the small of my back, a whispered compliment, became lifelines in a sea of monotony. Yet, with each encounter, the burden of guilt grew heavier. I was acutely aware of the betrayal, the violation of the vows I had once taken with such conviction. The contrast between the man at home, who had become more a fixture than a partner, and the one who ignited a fire within me, was stark. The affair was a balm to my long-neglected needs. In the arms of my coworker, I rediscovered parts of myself that I thought had been lost to the ravages of a loveless marriage. He made me feel desirable, something I hadn't felt in years. His desire for me was evident. His touches spoke of longing and admiration, making me feel like a woman worth wanting. Yet, this newfound fulfillment came with its own set of challenges. The secrecy of our meetings, the constant vigilance to avoid detection, the lies that slipped easily from my lips. It was a world built on a foundation of deceit. I was living a lie, and with each passing day, the strain of this duplicity chipped away at my sense of self. The physical aspect of our affair was intoxicating, a heady mix of passion and forbidden desire. Each encounter left me with a mix of euphoria and sorrow. The joy of being wanted was tainted by the knowledge that it was a temporary escape from a reality that I could not ignore. My home life became a series of mechanical interactions. Conversations with my husband were brief and superficial, our interactions void of the warmth that once defined us. The physical distance between us in our bed felt like a chasm, a silent testament to the emotional gulf that had formed. I was trapped in a cycle of longing and regret. The moments with my coworker were a respite from the emotional drought of my marriage, yet they were also a constant reminder of the deceit I was perpetuating. I was torn between the comfort of familiarity and the thrill of the new, between my commitment to my husband and my own desires. Each night, as I lay in bed next to my husband, the reality of my actions would settle around me like a heady cloak. The guilt was a constant companion, whispering reminders of the duplicity that had become my life. I was caught in a web of my own making, each thread a lie, each space a secret. This secret burden was a constant struggle, a battle between the desire for emotional fulfillment and the guilt of betrayal. It was a path that led me further away from the woman I once was, a journey into a realm of moral ambiguity where the lines between right and wrong were blurred. The day I resolved to confront my husband marked a turning point in our strained relationship. My heart was heavy with the weight of the confession I was about to make, a mix of fear and a desperate need for absolution. I had written 2 letters, one detailed and one more concise, allowing him the choice of how much he wanted to know. I found him tinkering with his motorcycle, lost in his own world. Gathering my courage, I approached him. "We need to talk. It's important." His response was dismissive, A simple acknowledgement before returning to his task. The sting of being brushed aside was all too familiar. Yet I waited, hoping for a moment of his attention. As time passed, my anxiety grew. The critical nature of our conversation loomed over me like a dark cloud. When I finally approached him again, he was lounging, absorbed in the television. His casual dismissal of my request to talk, a question of candid weight, left me feeling invisible and unimportant. Frustration and hurt boiled over and I walked away. The realization that I had been continuously brushed off throughout our marriage crystallized in my mind. I decided to pack my bags, a symbolic gesture of the end of my patience and the culmination of years of neglect. When my husband found me packing, his confusion was evident. "What are you doing?" he asked, unaware of the storm brewing within me. It was then that years of pent-up frustration and resentment erupted. I confronted him with raw emotion, my voice rising with every word. "I'm done being your roommate," begging for affection, trying to fix things alone. The confrontation escalated quickly, our voices raised in anger and pain. His dismissive attitude, the suggestion to find someone else, was the last straw. It was then, in the heat of the moment, that I revealed my affair. "I have since January." The shock on his face was palpable, a mix of disbelief and hurt. Our argument continued, a chaotic blend of accusations, confessions, and the outpouring of long-suppressed emotions. I was no longer holding back. Years of feeling neglected and pushed aside had given way to a flood of anger and sadness. In the midst of our heated exchange, my best friend arrived. I left with her, still shaken and emotionally drained, the reality of my actions and their consequences hitting me fully. The car ride to her place was a blur, my mind replaying the confrontation, the culmination of a marriage that had been crumbling for years. At my friend's house, the magnitude of the situation finally sunk in. I collapsed, overwhelmed by the realization that my marriage, which had started with so much love and hope, had deteriorated to this point. The grief for what had been lost was overwhelming. A painful acknowledgement of the part one had played in the disintegration of our relationship. The aftermath of the revelation was like the aftershocks of an earthquake, each moment reverberating with the intensity of the confrontation. The house, once a symbol of our shared life, now felt like a battleground, each room echoing with the words of our heated argument. My decision to leave was both impulsive and a long time coming. The years of feeling neglected, of my cries for affection and connection going unheard, had culminated in this moment of irrevocable change. As I packed my bags, each item I placed inside felt like a step further away from the life I had known. My husband's return was marked by confusion and anger. His question, "What the hell is your problem?" was met with the full force of my pent-up frustration. For years I had kept my feelings contained, but now they poured out uncontrollably. I yelled, my voice hoarse with emotion, "I'm done being your roommate. I'm done begging you to show affection." His response, a dismissive remark about me being dramatic, only fueled my anger. It was a stark reminder of the emotional disconnect that had plagued our marriage. "All you do is relax. I'm not bugging you anymore," I retorted, my words laced with bitterness. His attempt to downplay the situation, to brush off my feelings with a sarcastic "God, what is it?" was the last straw. I unleashed everything, years of suppressed emotions, the pain of being ignored, the loneliness of a one-sided effort to salvage our relationship. In a moment of raw honesty, I blurted out the depth of my desperation, how I had begged for his attention, for any sign of affection. His callous reply, suggesting that I find someone else, was met with the stark truth of my affair. The revelation shook him, and for the first time, it seemed as though he truly grasped the severity of our situation. The screaming match continued, the air thick with accusations and revelations. I was beyond holding back. This was years of frustration and resentment boiling over. Even as my best friend arrived, the argument raged on, a verbal manifestation of the emotional turmoil that had been brewing for years. Finally, I left, bags in hand, my friend by my side. The ride to her place was a blur of emotions. I was still reeling from the argument, the words we had exchanged, and the reality of what those words meant. It was a moment of breaking. A realization that the marriage I had entered with so much hope and love had irreparably changed. Arriving at my friend's house, the full impact of the situation hit me. I broke down, the grief and guilt overwhelming me. Repeating this isn't what I wanted over and over. I mourn not just the end of my marriage but also the loss of the future I had once envisioned. This chapter of my life had closed with a resounding crash, leaving me to grapple with the consequences of my actions and the reality of a future that was vastly different from what I had once hoped for. The night following my departure was one of the longest of my life. In the quiet sanctuary of my best friend's home, the events of the day replayed endlessly in my mind. The argument with my husband, the raw emotion, the finality of my departure, all of it swirled in a tumultuous mix of guilt, grief, and a poignant sense of loss. Sleep was elusive as each time I closed my eyes, I was haunted by the image of my husband's face when I revealed the affair. The shock, the hurt, the dawning realization of the depth of our marital crisis. It was a picture that cut through the chaos of my emotions, leaving a deep, aching sorrow. The following morning, I returned to the house that was no longer a home but a shell of memories and broken promises. My husband's demeanor had shifted. His anger was replaced with a cold indifference that was somehow more painful. As I gathered my belongings, his sly comments stung, but I had no energy left for confrontation. I was drained, a shell of the person who had once entered that house with so much love and hope. My response to his insinuations about staying with another man was terse, a simple whatever. Bye. It was a stark departure from the passionate outbursts of the previous day. The emotional exhaustion had settled in, leaving a numbness that was both a relief and a deep sadness. As I moved my belongings, each item I packed felt like a piece of my life that I was putting away. The realization that this was truly the end of my marriage, the end of a chapter of my life, was overwhelming. The hopes and dreams I had once harbored for us had dissipated, leaving behind a stark reality that I was now forced to confront. In the midst of this emotional turmoil, I grappled with the guilt of my infidelity and the acknowledgement of my role in the deterioration of our relationship. It wasn't just the affair, it was the years of neglect, the unmet needs, the silent cries for attention. All of it had contributed to the unraveling of our marriage. The drive to my friend's house was a journey of introspection. The streets and buildings passed in a blur, but my mind was sharply focused on the myriad of emotions coursing through me. There was guilt for the pain I had caused, grief for the loss of what had once been a loving relationship, and a profound sense of failure for not being able to salvage what we had built together. At my friend's house, I was met with a comforting embrace, a silent acknowledgement of the pain I was going through. In her presence, I allowed myself to feel the full extent of my emotions. The tears came unbidden and uncontrollable, each one a testament to the love, the loss, and the profound sense of regret that enveloped me. In the solitude of that room, away from the remnants of my failed marriage, I faced a harsh truth. The path that had led me here was paved with both my actions and my inactions. The affair, while a symptom of my unhappiness, was also a choice I had made. A choice that had irrevocably altered the course of my life. This descent into desolation was more than just the end of a marriage,